All right, we're going to start the meeting. The secretary is taking roll silently. Senators will be excused until they arrive. Minutes are approved as distributed. The minutes of March 21st and the minutes of March 23rd. They are approved unless there are objections. Any objections? All right, passed. Okay, so just as another reminder, we are live streaming today's meetings of our Human Resources Committee, and we're going to focus on how DHS will oversee the 3 MCOs and how they will ensure the MCOs are in compliance with contracts. We're 2 days away from going live with the managed care concept here, the transition, and I know that you all have a lot of individual constituent questions. So let's let Mikki respond to those, and let's focus today's questions on oversight and contract compliance. So with us today is Mikki Stier, our Medicaid director, Jean Slaybaugh, the CFO of DHS, and Liz Matney, the Medicaid Managed Care Bureau chief. And then we also have representatives from our managed care organizations if we have questions that we need to open the committee and ask. And we have 2 gentlemen from the Attorney General's office here to aid DHS and IME with their questions. So with that, Mikki, would you like to start and maybe talk about some of our handouts that we have received?
Again, we want to thank you very much for asking us to come and walk you through these. I'm going to try and organize some of your papers and some of your handouts, and then I'm going to defer the contracting and some of the oversight to Liz Matney, the Bureau Chief. So I'm going to try and get us all on the same page if we can. So the first one I would have you look at is what's called Contract Requirements, the Iowa Healthcare Initiative. It looks like this document. Yep, if you can lay that in front. And then I'm going to have you take the managed care reporting frequency that looks like this document. Just have it. Okay. There you go. And then you have a weekly dashboard prototype. Then you have the monthly dashboard prototype. Then we have an MCO claims compliance. It looks like this document. Okay. And then the last one was requested, and this one I'll go through real quick, but this is the comparison chart that you have here. So that chart, which you don't have to spend a whole lot of time on it, basically that looks at Medicaid, the Iowa Health and Wellness Plan, the Iowa Family Plan, and Hawkeye, and actually what the general plan provisions are for each one of these plans, because these are the plans that are covered under managed care. So it's a reference guide for you. So with that, I will turn over the contracting review of these documents to Liz Matney now that our packets are organized. Thank you.
Go ahead, Liz.
All right, so when you look at that first handout, which has the contracting requirements, just want to make it clear that these, of course, are not all of the requirements in the contract. These are just excerpts that are specifically related to the reports that will be coming into the department, how we receive information from the managed care organizations, and specific reporting requirements. So when you look at section 2.16, which is in the first box of text, that really outlines the managed care organization's responsibility to respond to department requests for information that would include requests that are coming from legislators, constituents, or other external parties such as other state agencies. Outlines the fact that they need to respond timely, fulsomely, and then when you get down into the general components under section 14, those are specific to other reports that we have required in the contract. So operational, outcome, performance reports that we're actually expecting on an ongoing basis to be receiving from the managed care organizations. So it outlines the fact that if they don't submit those timely and accurately they are subject to remedies for noncompliance. It outlines the expectation that we will be holding them to certain benchmarks of performance. And it also outlines, if you go further into it, kind of a high-level overview of what we're expecting to capture in certain reporting areas. Any questions so far?
Can I ask you, what are some of those remedies of noncompliance?
A couple weeks ago, when we came in here to talk about compliance, we brought a list of different remedies. Those range anywhere from a written warning all the way to contract termination. So within that spectrum, we also have corrective action. We have suspension of assignments of members, withholding of capitation payments, liquidated damages as well.
Let me ask you this, 14.3.4. So 14.3.4 is member helpline performance report. So I'm looking at you have maintain a service level of 80% for incoming calls. And then, so along that same lines, then what happens when this doesn't occur? Can you tell us the gradients of, so, you know, you may warn them, and then what? And then are there fines along the way?
We're in the process of working with our Attorney General's office and finalizing each one of those steps. However, we do anticipate that those remedies will be based on the severity of the noncompliance and the repetition of the noncompliance. So the progression of the remedies will align with those standards.
Standards, and then when will the Attorney General get involved? At what point of the standards?
We're working with the Attorney General's office in setting some type of standardized process for looking at those areas of noncompliance and how we're addressing those with remedies. We additionally have, for areas of performance, we have in the very back of the contract, it's in Exhibit F, pay for performance features, where we're actually withholding 2% of the capitation rates and let until they meet those measures. So if they go an entire year without meeting adequate service helpline for members metrics, so that 80% service level threshold, we will be retaining that 2% and not giving that to the MCO.
There's also under 14.4.3, provider credentialing report. I've received several emails from constituents who say we're part of the provider network, but we're waiting for credentialing. Maybe one MCO has credentialed and another one has not. I have one person in particular who has been working with one of the MCOs since August and still doesn't have credentialing. How will that affect someone who's not credentialed? How will that affect their billing practices, and how can we, what can they do? What's the remedy for credentialing?
Sure. If you look into in the contract, if they do not meet certain expectations for provider credentialing, so they have to credential, I believe, within 45 days from start to finish. If they don't meet that, they could face liquidated damages. They could face that we wouldn't give back their withhold. And we're tracking each one of those contracts very closely, especially as we're approaching April 1, to see when they actually came into the managed care organization, signed, how fast it's taking to get those processed and mailed back out to the providers.
There's a section 14.5.5.1 under behavioral health. It just lists a lot of things. It says follow-up after inpatient hospitalization for mental illness, readmission rates for psychiatric hospital. I'm assuming that the part of the contract is probably several pages. This is outlining it. Can you tell me what's the purpose of this section in the contract?
The purpose of this part of the reporting requirements is that we are going to be measuring very specific member outcomes and health outcomes that are specifically related to behavioral health. So we do want to see the inpatient length of stay go down. We want to see inpatient readmission go down. We want to see medication adherence go up. So there's a certain amount of things that we are going to be looking at, comparing those to our own experience in fee-for-service, as well as the baseline that the managed care organization establishes, and expect improvements to those measures as we go forward.
And one last one while we're on this, this report. So 14.7, quality of life reports and performance targets. And it goes on to suggest that there's baseline data and performance targets surrounding quality of life outcomes for members. Potential areas for membership include increased life expectancy, number of percentage of members who gain and maintain competitive employment, et cetera. And then it says the agency will analyze the findings of the survey to identify required performance. Will you be taking in any other data from community partners that may be not directly related to Medicaid? So let's say a demonstration grant that might be going on in a community. Will those statistics also be allowed, or are these only statistics that the managed care organizations are collecting on their data through Medicaid?
It's going to be a combination of different data sources. Of course, you know, this is going to be related to Medicaid populations, but we're looking at aligning with all different types of data sources, initiatives, demonstration projects. So the SIM grant, the outcomes that all of the regions have, looking to align those so that we're all moving in the same direction.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if you want to continue on this form, and do members of the committee have questions? Yes. Who's
Reagan.
First? Okay, Senator Reagan.
You talked about the liquidated damages. So where will that money go?
As it stands today, that money would go back into the medical assistance appropriation.
And, you know, there's the requirement for all the MCOs to have boards, stockholder advisory boards up and running. Do you have copies of those, or of the list of those?
I don't have those currently with me, but we could certainly get those. I know that each one of the MCOs is planning on onboarding each one of those stakeholder advisory groups in May.
Quarterly, and check in with them. And then one last question on, we used to have, or we had something called lock-in, and that was a cost savings for high users. And I think there's an IL that came out that stops that process now. Why would we stop that just because we have MCOs?
From a fee-for-service perspective, we have a pretty small relative population that's going to be remaining in fee-for-service. Within the managed care organizations, they have a lot of different utilization management and quality management programs, such as their own lock-in programs. So we don't need to layer a DHS lock-in program on top of a managed care lock-in program.
Those people will just, if they're in a fee-for-service, you could do it, but that aren't in the MCOs, you'll continue that possibly, but you won't. Each managed care organization can do their own utilization review then. Okay.
Correct.
Senator Bolcom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for being here again. The reporting requirements, the contracting requirements seem pretty extensive, and there's a lot of things to pay attention to here. I count up almost 20 different reports that are kind of noted in this. There might be more. So my questions are just the capacity of the department to gather all this data. The data is one thing. I assume you have capacity to do that, but there'll be a lot of data that comes in. I'm wondering the analysis of the data. One of the areas we asked for is quarterly health outcomes and clinical reports on utilization and quality outcomes, and we measure on behavioral health, children's health, prenatal screening, a whole host of things, hospitalization, ER, chronic condition management. So we're going to gather all this data. Will the department do some analysis of the data in terms of, and this is over time, right? We're going to have a baseline. Where's the current program on, say, hospital readmissions was one thing. But are you going to do analysis of the data for us in terms of this is going in the right direction, it's going in the wrong direction? I know that we collect data in a number of different departments, and sometimes the departments are put on a spot when they have to give us an opinion about whether things are going well or not going well in a particular, I work on a lot of tax stuff, and it's hard for the Department of Revenue to tell us if the tax thing's working or not because it makes people mad. So are you going to do analysis on whether or not we're getting the kind of outcomes that we think we should, and how's that going to be communicated to us?
There's really no point in collecting all of this data without doing analysis. So like you said, these reports are very extensive. We have developed automated processes for the reports, the data to be uploaded into a system, which will then kick off workflows within our Managed Care Bureau and IME to proceed with that type of analysis. So we'll be using not only our fee-for-service data that we have today to establish baselines, but also establishing MCO baselines as we move forward, and then looking at the data on a very regular basis, however often that the reports come in, weekly, maybe initially, monthly, quarterly, annually, to establish trends that compare between the MCOs, compared to fee-for-service, and then also individually within the MCO to measure their own performance.
I guess we'll see as time goes on. I know, you know, you guys work for the governor, and this has always been about telling the good story about how this is going, right? So at some point, somebody's going to ask, is this experiment working? And there will be some people in this building that will want to say, of course it is, but we'll want the data to tell us if it is. And I guess what you just said is you're going to be able to tell us whether or not, you know, there might be some disagreement about that, or inability to do it, independence to do it. So I just want to make sure, I'm asking today whether we're going to get some real good, clear analysis of the data.
So in addition to the department looking at it and doing analysis, we also have an external quality review company on board, as well as a program integrity contractor on board as well. And then for quality, we also have, for the SIM, we've had the TRAO 3M. So we do have external. We also have the University of Iowa that also will do some of the public policy studies for us. So it will be a combination of the internal department as well as the external vendors looking at the data for us and helping us analyze that. And I think later on in the handouts, we have some prototypes of dashboards. Mm-hmm.
Just an aside. So I got a question from one of the providers. If they would be privy to that information so that they could also go in that same direction where, let's say you collect the data and you see these gaps in the system. And so as you're trying to work with the MCOs to make sure that that gap in the system or a frailty in the system is met, is that going to be shared with providers so they can move toward that goal as well? And how soon would that be shared with the providers? If it's maybe tied to reimbursement, or, you know, I'll just leave it at that.
So some of the data already has been through the value-based purchasing, and with the SIMS grant, the component that's in the contract says that we will have 40% of the providers on that value-based reporting system. So those providers will see that today, and it's very specific. As we move along and we move more towards that model of value-based purchasing, additional information would be shared.
Each one of the managed care organizations also has a quality management group where they work extensively at looking at their own data to make sure that they're finding the root cause of where the data might not be meeting their own internal expectations or even the department's expectations, and then following up with what that would be. In some situations, it could be a certain provider, it could be a provider type, where they might need to do additional outreach, education, training. So that would all be built into the framework of a managed care quality management system.
Senator Shelgren.
I guess one of the questions I would have in this process is that as we enter into the MCO project, we have 3 MCOs that have signed up at this time. I know that our goal is to have more than that. In a competitive environment, obviously we'd want to have an additional or 1 or 2 additional MCOs. But I guess my question ends up being is, as we go through to evaluate the success or failure of this project, I'm assuming some of the data will be given back to the MCOs for their own personal improvement process, but also is there going to be something that's done publicly so that the consumers can then choose the MCO that's performing the best? In other words, you know, we might look at it differently with regards to what's saving the taxpayer money, but the actual user of the system might be looking at it to say who's providing the best services. And I'd like to understand how we're going to put that on a website, make people aware of it so that the consumer has some decision making in these 3 providers, or hopefully more providers in the future, as to which one's actually performing best for their interest.
A couple of things. First of all, we have, to your point, it's important to acknowledge that we need to have a really good feedback loop in the system. So as we're getting data in and we're analyzing it and we're finding out what that data is telling us, we need to follow back up with the managed care organization and make sure that they're incorporating that into their own business practice. So if there's a struggle with meeting some performance measure, we will be letting the MCOs know that there needs to be an intervention. That might require a corrective action plan, but whatever does happen, the Managed Care Bureau will be following up to make sure that there is something in place to correct that issue. That is also outlined in, let's see, it is the handout 5. It has, it's a demonstration of the MCO claims processing compliance review. It's 2 pages. So what that also does show is that there is a feedback loop back to the MCO, but I can go through that in a second. Like Mikki noted, we do have some dashboard prototypes in this packet as well. So we're looking at publishing those on the DHS website so that that is available to all of you. It's available to the public, and that will be a good tool for members to use as they're looking at managed care performance. Additionally, our external quality review team, after the first year, will start developing MCO performance scorecards. So we'll have those available additionally once we have enough baseline data available for the public to be able to leverage.
And I do appreciate that. I just want to, you know, ask the department to make sure that we don't just set a minimum standard that we hope these MCOs achieve and hold them accountable to that minimum standard. My goal is that as we go along, those standards, as they exceed, hopefully, our expectations, we can share that with the consumers. So thank you.
Does anyone else want to ask questions? Senator Johnson or Senator Garrett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question. I don't know how common or uncommon this problem is, but I have a constituent that rents equipment to Medicaid recipients, and he has 500 customers or so, and his problem is he doesn't know who the 500 have signed up with, which of the 3. And they've got no particular reason to contact him and tell him. They're just using the equipment, and in the past, he bills Medicaid, and they paid him and so on. So my question is, could he contact you with a list of his customers so that could you then tell him which provider or which of these 3 companies they are with so he knows who to bill? How would he resolve that other than calling 500 people and asking them who they're with?
The department has what's called the ELVS line. It's the eligibility line. It also has a web portal. So if he was to go in there and load those individuals on that portal, that would tell them who they're assigned to.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Senators, next question. Yes, you want to go through the rest of the materials? Okay, thanks.
Document 2, which might have come upside down, so try flipping it over. This shows how frequent we anticipate to be monitoring different reports. If you look back into the contract requirements, it does make reference that initially we can require reports to be coming in more frequently. We have determined there are key things that we need to keep an eye on, such as claims payment, prior authorizations, geographic access, and member and provider helpline. So if we shift over to monthly reports, these are all of the reports that we will be receiving monthly, quarterly, so on and so forth. So as you can see, some of these are reported on a monthly, quarterly, and annual basis, but then as you shift farther down through the packet, you will see that some are only reported quarterly.
Will these be available for the public?
These will all feed into the dashboards that we'll be providing. So when you look at this matrix, you'll see which reports are coming in and know when they will be showing up on different reports. So we have, if you look at the ongoing monthly quarterly dashboard, prototype 2, which was the 4th handout, I believe. This includes all of the reports, well, the ones that we determined that would be probably most meaningful to the public, the monthly and quarterly reports that we would be proposing to include in our dashboard. So we've split it up into different groups. We have the demographics, which are the number of members enrolled, the number that will be default assigned to an MCO versus actively selecting an MCO, how the populations are split out between long-term care, TANF, wellness, and MCO disenrollment, and then LTSS distribution. All of these things are going to tell us, they're all kind of symptoms of where we might need to look deeper, which is something that we'll be following through with the plans. So if you see a spike in disenrollment from one plan, that tells you that you need to go in a little bit deeper and look and find out what the reasons are for those disenrollments, and then track those down and follow through with the MCOs.
Some of this criteria to create the dashboard, did you get that from IME experience, or did you also draw from experiences from other states that have moved to managed care?
We built all of these based on our reporting manual. We built the reporting manual, which has all of the components that need to be reported on for each one of the reports that we're collecting. So what each data element means, the numerators, the denominators, the frequencies, etc. That all feeds into the dashboard. When we were creating these things, we looked at other states and what they had publicly available and what their experience was with reporting and collecting data from the managed care organizations. We also hired an external company called Navigant. They helped us with our readiness review for each one of the managed care organizations. They also helped us structure and format our reporting manual, as well as brainstorm and think about what would be the most important things to include in a dashboard.
Any of these requirements from CMS as well, something that you need to follow? Okay.
Yes. So as you go through, you'll see that the different data elements that we would be reporting on are broken out into different pieces. So we have the demographics, member services, provider services, service authorizations, quality, financial. Different reports within each one of those that are very important, including claims payment, the days to credential, how quickly they're authorizing services, so that we can keep a track on making sure that the members are receiving services timely.
Have some of these, so you referred back to some you've looked at with your IME hat on. So some of these have already been tested. What are the things that have not been tested in here yet by IME in the present fee-for-service model, and now they will be tested in the managed care model?
I think that the biggest things that are limited in testing in the fee-for-service area are really related to the value index score and the different domains that are related to that. We have that really more focused on a limited group right now, which is the Iowa Health and Wellness Plan, but we are going to be expanding that to incorporate long-term services and supports and behavioral health. We've been tracking readmissions, inpatient stays, all of these things, but just not in the same collective format that we're looking at here, which is going to be really beneficial for us as a department as well as the public.
I believe Senator Bolcom has a question for you, Liz.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate the knowing kind of the frequency of the reporting. One thing that I don't see in terms of reporting is anything around the administrative fees. Is it, I know in one of the requirements of the contract is the medical loss ratio. They have to spend 88% of what we provide for resources on care, and then we have the 12% admin. Is there a specific report from the MCOs to IME regarding the spending of the administrative money and things like profit and care coordination and general administration?
There is a report that's required for medical loss ratio. The definition that we're using for medical loss ratio follows the National Association of Insurance Commissioners definition, and it is included on the report. It's just...
It's 14.2.7. It's at 88%.
And it's on this one, but it's...
I guess my question is that, so 88%, I assume that means 88% of the resources are spent on people's health care.
Healthcare claims, correct?
So the 12% that's not accounted for is the administrative fee?
Correct.
Okay. What kind of reporting are we going to get on that? In terms of things like profit and I think care coordination or case management is part of the 12%. General administration, I mean, I think we've heard companies have hired up to 100, 200, 300 people. I assume that they'd be included in that. But I don't see that in any of the contracting requirements in terms of reports.
So the type of detail you're referring to is something that our actuarial firm would review when we're doing rate setting. They would review it on an annual basis, and that is information that will be available and reported.
So we'll know how much they spend on care coordination and general administration, and how much money is going out of the state in the form of profit. I mean, is that what you're talking about, or you're talking about the 88% and the...
We'll have a lot of different data sets that can inform us about that data. So we've talked about, or about the information you're asking about. We've talked about encounter data previously. Encounter data is basically like trailing claims data that will help us understand the composition of their medical expense. It may not be 88%, it may be more than that, but that encounter data will help us understand the composition of that expense, and that's something that we'll be looking at across the plans. Of course, you have to also bring the population in, so if one plan has a higher population of LTSS members, for example, you would expect to see different composition in their claims cost for that. And then annually, we'll be looking at the administrative cost, and obviously the difference is going to be the profit between the medical loss and the administrative loss.
And will that be reported? I mean, you'll be looking at it, but will we ever know here? Will we have to...
Yes.
How will that be? Will you do an annual report on that?
I think it'll be included in the annual report, correct?
I believe so.
I would hope that it would be.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
One explanation of encounter data, I think, Jean, you may have said it's claims from a third party broken into the services that are used. So it's broken down. Encounter data is that.
Right. The
Okay.
claim won't be coming to us directly. The claim will be going to the MCO. The MCO will be sending then that information to us. And at that step in the process, it's called encounter data.
Liz, you want to keep going? Sure. You're on a roll. Oh, wait, Senator Johnson had a question. Do you have a question for Liz on that? Okay.
I know we have more to go through. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Madam Chair. What about marketing? I'm concerned that I'll be watching Morning Joe at 5 o'clock in the morning and I'm going to see advertisements for how to get enrolled with an MCO. And I base that on what happened with Hawkeye, where I thought money was just being thrown away unnecessarily on billboards, which I don't believe really work for health programs, and other things, including commercials at 5 o'clock in the morning. So public service, of course, PSAs, of course, but they're not going to put them in prime time. But are we going to get a report on how much is being spent on marketing, how it's being spent, or is that going to be considered proprietary information?
So we do, I've seen ads for the MCOs now. I don't know if you've seen them, but I've seen ads. They are allowed to conduct advertising or marketing, if you would. There are very specific requirements that they have to comply with, CMS regulations that they have to comply with. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you the level of detail that we would provide in marketing. We will have financial reports from the annual audited financial statements from the MCOs that will include some information in terms of the level of detail regarding the composition of their marketing. That's something that I would have to take back and look at.
I'm just interested in that. I appreciate that. But also with marketing goes to, I mean, another issue there is effectiveness. I mean, do you just, you know, I mean, you're just doing marketing to make everybody feel good, or you got to try to do it for an effective means of getting contact? I'm not sure that some of today's modern marketing really gets through, but that's just my opinion. You know, I'm just sitting here. Where's all this been? How fresh is all this? What I'm looking at right here, and aside from the packages that came from the MCOs, which I'm surprised we're getting right now, but how fresh is all this from the